Well, welcome back to Whole Bible Study with Taddy Noy. If you're just joining us, we've been following Israel's journey out of Egypt and into the wilderness. God has dramatically rescued them through the Red Sea, provided water at Merhem, manna from heaven, and quail to eat. The people are learning what it means to rely on God daily, but their trust is still very fragile. They've experienced incredible miracles, but each new challenge brings new doubt. In today's chapter, we'll see how that pattern continues and how God continues to meet them with grace and power. Let's read Exodus chapter 17 together. Exodus chapter 17 from the NIV version. The whole Israel community set out from the desert of Sin, traveling from place to place as the Lord commanded. They camped at Rephidim, but there was no water for the people to drink. So they quarreled with Moses and said, "Give us water to drink." Moses replied, "Why do you quarrel with me? Why do you put the Lord to the test?" But the people were thirsty for water there. But the people were thirsty for water there, and they grumbled against Moses. They said, "Why did you bring us out of Egypt to make us and our children and livestock die of thirst?" Then Moses cried out to the Lord, "What am I to do with these people? They are almost ready to stone me." The Lord answered to Moses, "Go out from the people, take with you some of the elders of Israel, and take in your hand the staff in which you struck the Nile, and go. I will stand there before you by the rock at Horeb. Strike the rock, and water will come out of it for the people to drink." So Moses did this in the sight of the elders of Israel. And he called the place Massah and Meribah, because the Israelites quarreled and because they tested the Lord, saying, "Is the Lord among us or not?" The Amalekites came and attacked the Israelites at Rephidim. Moses said to Joshua, "Choose some of our men and go out to fight the Amalekites. Tomorrow I will stand on top of the hill with the staff of God in my hands." So Joshua fought the Amalekites as Moses had ordered, and Moses, Aaron, and Hur went to the top of the hill. As long as Moses held up his hands, the Israelites were winning, but whenever he lowered his hands, the Amalekites were winning. When Moses' hands grew tired, they took a stone and put it under him, and he sat on it. Aaron and Hur held his hands up, one on one side and one on the other, so that his hands remained steadily till sunset. So Joshua overcame the Amalekite army with the sword. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Write this on a scroll as something to be remembered, and to make sure that Joshua hears it, because I will completely blot out the name of Amalek from under heaven." Moses built an altar and called it, "The Lord is my banner." He said, "Because hands were lifted up against the throne of the Lord will be at war against the Amalekites from generation to generation." Now for the deep dive, Exodus 17. Exodus 17 holds two powerful scenes that reveal the human heart and divine character in striking detail. First, the crisis at Rephidim with the lack of water, and second, the battle with the Amalekites. Both stories are deeply embedded with the theological, cultural, and symbolic significance, and each tells us something about how God shapes a community in the wilderness. We begin with thirst. The Israelites have arrived at Rephidim, and there's no water. And again, they grumble. But this time, it's not just murmuring, it's a confrontation. The Hebrew word used in verse 2 for quarreled is riv, which carries legal overtones. This isn't just complaining, it's more like putting Moses, and by extension God, on trial. The people are asking, "Is the Lord among us or not?" That's the core of their crisis. They aren't just thirsty for water, they're thirsty for presence. The miracle at the Red Sea feels distant now. The daily manna isn't enough to silence their anxiety. This is a deeply human pattern. When needs go unmet, even briefly, we question the whole foundation of our faith. God responds not with anger, but with provision. and his instructions are deeply symbolic. Moses is told to strike the rock at Horeb, the very mountain associated with God's covenantal presence. The Hebrew word for strike is nakah, the same root used for the plagues in Egypt. It implies judgment and power. But here, the blow doesn't bring destruction, it brings life. Early rabbinic tradition and later Christian interpretation both viewed this rock as a type of Christ. Struck once to provide living water, Paul echoes this in 1 Corinthians 10:4, saying they drank from the spiritual rock that accompanied them, and that rock was Christ. Whether seen allegorically or not, the theological point is clear. God's provision often comes from unexpected places, and what appears to be judgment can become a channel of grace. Moses names the place Massah, testing, and Meribah, quarreling. These names become cautionary symbols in Israel's memory, showing up later in Psalms and in Deuteronomy. They are reminders of how spiritual forgetfulness leads to crisis. In Deuteronomy 8:3, Moses will remind the people that God let them hunger to teach them dependence, not to harm them, but to reveal their need for every word that proceeds from his mouth. Then, without transition, we're thrown into war. The Amalekites attack. This is the first military confrontation Israel faces after leaving Egypt. It's not just a skirmish, it's a theological test. Amalek becomes a Jewish memory, the embodiment of those who attack the weak and oppose God's covenantal people. In Deuteronomy 25:17 through 18, we learn that Amalek targeted the stranger, the stragglers, the vulnerable, those lagging behind. It was cowardly and cruel. Moses sends Joshua to battle, his first appearance as a military leader, and goes up on a hill with the staff of God. This is no ordinary object. It's the same staff that parted the sea, turned the Nile to blood, and summoned the plagues. It represents divine authority. As long as Moses holds it high, Israel prevails. But Moses is human. His arms grow tired. This is such a raw, a beautiful moment. Even the most faithful leaders get weary. And here we see the power of the community. Aaron and Hur hold up his arms. The Hebrew for steady in verse 12 is emunah, a word often translated as faith or faithfulness. Moses' arms are held up by the faith of others. That's discipleship. That's family. This moment becomes so iconic that Moses builds an altar afterwards and calls it the Lord is my banner, Yahweh Nissi. In ancient warfare, banners were symbols of identity and unity. They rallied troops and declared whose side you were on. By calling God his banner, Moses isn't celebrating military might. He's declaring that their victory came not from swords, but from the presence of the Lord. In verse 14 is especially interesting. God tells Moses to write it down and make sure Joshua hears it. This is the beginning of Israel's sacred historical record. The act of writing isn't just administrative, it's theological. Memory matters, though God wants this moment etched not only in Joshua's leadership journey, but in the nation's soul. Culturally, this chapter reflects a significant shift. Israel is no longer just a band of escapees. They're becoming a nation. They are learning to fight, to trust, to remember, and to rely on each other. God is not just delivering them, he's forming them. Every crisis is a classroom. And theologically, Exodus 17 reminds us that provision and battle are often side by side. One moment we're being fed miraculously, the next we're under attack. But in both, God is near. He provides water from the rock and strength for the fight. He's present in the ordinary and the extraordinary, in the staff and in the stone. Now for some final reflections. I love how honest this chapter is. It doesn't romanticize the journey. It shows the people doubting, the leader weary, the attacks sudden. And yet it shows God faithfully present in every detail. in such a comfort. It's such a comfort to know that God meets us in the desert and on the battlefield in our thirst and in our fear. And I'm struck by Moses. He keeps showing up, even when the people are ready to stone him, even when he's exhausted, even when his arms are too tired and weak. He doesn't quit, but he also doesn't pretend to be a superhero. He lets others hold him up. That's leadership. That's humility. And that's something I want to grow into. If something in today's chapter spoke to you, stirred something, or raised questions, I'd love to hear it from you. Drop a comment and let's keep this journey a shared one. I'm grateful you're walking through the story with me. May you go into today remembering this: God is faithful when we are empty, and present when we feel alone. Whether you're in a season of thirst or battle, He is still your banner. He is still the rock that gives you life. Thank you so much for joining me with today's chapter, and we will see you in the next chapter.